Dixieland. In Dixie's land where I was born in early on one frosty morning. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. And I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand and live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Away, away, away down south in Dixie. Oh, Mrs. Mary Will the River, William was a gay, she will look away, look away, Dixieland. And when he put his arms around her, smiled as fierce as a 40-pound. Look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand and live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south of Dixie. Away, away, away down south of Dixie. His face was sharp as a butcher's cleaver, but that did not seem to grieve her. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Now Mrs. acted the foolish part. She died for a man that broke her heart. So look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand, live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south of Dixie. Away, away, away down south of Dixie. Well, I wish I was in the land of coffee, in old town there I've not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. In Dixie's land where I was born in early on one frosty morning. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland. Then I wish I was in Dixie, hooray, hooray. In Dixie's land I'll take my stand, live and die in Dixie. Away, away, away down south of Dixie. Away, away, away down south I place my knapsack on my back, my rifle on my shoulder. March away to the firing line to kill that Yankee soldier. I'll kill that Yankee soldier. March away to the firing line to kill that Yankee soldier. I bid farewell to my wife and child, farewell to my aged mother. Go and join in the bloody strife till this cruel war is over, till this cruel war is over. Go and join in the bloody strife till this cruel war is over.
Oh, I'm glad I'm a good old rebel. I won't care if I am. I won't be reconstructed If I am, may I be damned. Oh, I followed old Moss Robert for 4 years now about. Got wounded in 3 places and I starved at Camp Lookout. Oh, I'm glad I'm a good old rebel. Hat, boot, coats, and all. I won't be reconstructed, no, sir, not at all. I hate that Yankee nation and all they say and do. I hate the Declaration of Independence, too. I hate that striped banner with all its rare and fuss. Them lying, thieving Yankees, I hate 'em worse and worse. Oh, I'm glad I'm a good old rebel. I don't care if I am. I won't be reconstructed. No, sir, not a damn. I can't take up my musket and fight 'em anymore. But I ain't a-going to love 'em, now that I'm certain sure. Yes, I'm glad I'm a good old rebel. Hat, boot, coats, and all. I won't be reconstructed. No, sir, not at all.
Forge! Gang! Let's go! This is your host, the Warhammer, coming at you with another Warhammer geopolitical analysis. And this time I will be discussing about the Southland. I will be talking about the Southern United States. The Southern United States. And this is going to probably be the last region that I'm going to do. I just wanted to make sure to, I just wanted to get through and discuss this before I go on and start doing actual countries. That's pretty fucking gay. Alright, let me go ahead and post this. Kind of go around here and distribute this out. Here we go. Coach Red Pill, Gangsters and Shoes. Where do I go here? General. Memes. Okay, I'll post on the off topic. Oh, that looks delicious. Chicken Zurich. Let's see here. Yeah, I'll just go ahead and post some of this here. Kind of get people in here to start this. Alright, we got some people watching. Alright. Smooth shave. Much better. Why? I figured that having a beard made me more of a Chad. Why do you think that me not having a beard makes it much better, Eric? Jordan, what's the next Punt the Gunt weigh-in? It's gonna come Monday. I've lost a lot of weight. I've lost almost 10 pounds. So, since Mormon Shaggy is back in, I'm going to start taking it a lot more serious. I'm just using peanut butter to take away my hunger. It helps enormously. Alright, let's see how the stream is going. It looks like it's going to be a small audience for this time of the day. Let's take a look and see what we got here.
Since Shaggy, since Mormon Shaggy is back in.
Alright, here we go. Let's get into this. Alright, so you having a beard looks like you are homeless. I really doubt that. I think it's good to have a beard. I think it makes me look more Chad, bro. By the way, Eric, what happened to your account on Discord? Did somebody hack your account? Either you've lost it, bro, and you've been acting weird as of lately, or somebody hacked your Discord account. But maybe you could explain that. But yeah, peanut butter helps a lot to kill off the diet issues. With no clothes on, I weigh about 205 pounds. And I'm not about to bring, I'm not about to do it today, dude. Let's just get on with the geopolitical analysis. Alright. So the American South is very unique in the entire United States. So yeah, the United States of America is known as being a melting pot of friendship, blah, blah, blah. I'm not going to watch the chat, it distracts me. But yeah, anyways, the South is an exception. Because of slavery and because of Jim Crow, there weren't that many immigrants that came to the South. The South is literally a very unique place. I'll go ahead and read this article from Occidental Descent. This is a pretty interesting, nice little article about what happened, dude. But I know that it's pointless to follow like whatever a troll says, but the Laughing Adolf made an incredibly retarded comment. The Laughing Adolf said that Texas has the highest suicide and depression rates and the least fertile rates in the United States, and that's not true. The American South industrialized very late. Like, the American South only started to industrialize during World War II, and even really significantly later than that. So, most of the stuff about autism and about manic depression and suicide and self-harm, that only has really to do with industrialized societies, and guess what? Surprise, surprise, the Northeast and California has the highest rates of all of these said aforementioned side effects. So depression and autism and stuff, that relates to the Industrial Revolution. The American South was never really a very industrialized place. So if you seriously believe that Southerners are more autistic than Northerners, you're a fucking retard. I don't know what to say about you, bro. Go fuck yourself. The North was like industrial 100 years before the South got there. You have no idea what you're fucking talking about. Alright. What is a Southerner? Culturally speaking, my answer is that the South looks a lot like this. Genetically speaking, the South looks a lot like this. Religiously, the South looks like this. Blah, blah, blah. A few years ago, I took a deeper dive into the question of, in Blood and Soil, how Southerners became a separate and distinct people. My conclusion was that the South grew out of three cultural hurts: Jamestown and the Tidewater region in eastern Virginia, the Scotch-Irish migration from Pennsylvania down the Great Valley into the southern back country, and Charleston and the South Carolina Low Country, which was a product of the Barbadian-led expansion of the plantation complex across the British West Indies. There were also a few minor cultural herfs like the Acadian migration to southern Louisiana. The so-called South is the confluence of these cultures. There's also, by the way, there's also a bit of Midwestern influence in places like Missouri and West Virginia as well. So the South is the confluence of these cultures. They collided and mixed within our region. They were heavily influenced by the climate and geography of the South, which is a major source of both our unity and most prominent divisions. The conflicts with the Indians and African slavery made race much more salient here than it was elsewhere in North America. Southern identity was gradually built on a perception of difference with Indians, African slaves, the Yankee, Mexicans, and the British. As has been explained to death on this website, Southerners are not merely Anglos or Celts. On the contrary, our ancestors were not drawn randomly from the British Isles. The deep South, Tidewater, and the British West Indies drew lots of immigrants from Western England and metropolitan London. Appalachia drew more Scotch-Irish immigrants from the borderlands. At the same time, the Scotch-Irish also settled in the lower South, and English from coastal areas also migrated into Appalachia, where they mixed. It is more of a difference of degree and predominance than anything else. There have always been non-British minorities within the South. Germans and Swiss settled all over Appalachia and the Piedmont. They settled large parts of Missouri and Texas, and they were present in Kentucky. The Gulf Coast was once under the administration of Spain. Texas and Louisiana were part of New Spain. Florida was founded as a Spanish colony. The French settled in Louisiana and along the Mississippi and Alabama Gulf Coast. Cubans have been present in Florida in large numbers since the 19th century. French refugees from Saint Dominic settled in New Orleans and Charleston, which was founded in part by Huguenots. The Irish settled in Savannah, Charleston, and New Orleans. Highland Scots settled in North Carolina. There were Italians who settled in New Orleans. There were Greeks who settled in Birmingham and Tampa. Yankees and Jews have always been present in our cities. Ethnically speaking, the South has an Anglo-Protestant base. As far as I can tell, we're probably about 3/4 British and 1/4 non-British European. The South is overwhelmingly Protestant, but there has always been a Catholic element in Maryland and along the Gulf Coast. Since men and women tend to breed with people in their immediate area, the result of generations of mixing on the genetic level are the clusters on display above. Whiteness is the category that traditionally mattered in law, and there were never any legal impediments to mixing between Europeans. Now, this last sentence here, this is actually not really true entirely, because in Louisiana, the Cajuns and the French and Spanish speakers maintained an ethnic distinction with the Anglos until at least after World War II. So that was not always the case. The South is a product of our ancestry, but it is also a product of our culture, our politics and economy, our climate and geography, our religion, and our shared history and traditions. We branched off from the British centuries ago and have been evolving into our own unique ethnic group ever since. The war between the states and the poverty of the Jim Crow era nurtured a common Southern white folk culture. The sheer passage of time and generations of intermarriage has made us more homogeneous than we were in the past. The same process created the nations of Europe over the course of several centuries. Can Yankees become Southerners? Can Cubans become Southerners? Can Cajuns become Southerners? I will just note that the 19th century South was full of such people. They were absorbed along with Irish and Italian immigrants because they were present here in small numbers. So Galveston Port was an example of a lot of non-British and non-Irish people coming into Texas and the South, but unlike Ellis Island, there was not an outpouring of immigrants. So the Irish and the Italians only came over here in rather insignificant numbers, and they never truly ethnically replaced the colonial population as such. Purity spiraling is ridiculous on so many levels. Should we rename Alabama, Mississippi, and Arkansas for being Indian place names? Was P.G.T. Beauregard a Southerner? Should we rename Louisiana and Texas from Tejas for not being properly Anglo? What should we do about our neoclassical architecture inspired by Greece and Rome? Should we stop growing corn or tobacco because these were Indian crops? The log cabins built by Scotch-Irish frontiersmen were borrowed from the Swedes and Finns in Pennsylvania. Germans introduced Conestoga wagons and so on. The lower South was the spawn of the West Indies. Given the way history is taught, few educated Americans realized that when the English were beginning to grow tobacco in Jamestown and Pilgrims were imposing order in Plymouth by cutting down a maypole, other Englishmen were beginning to settle in St. Christopher, St. Kitts, 1624 Barbados in 1627, Nevis 1628, and Montserrat and Antigua 1630s. They were closely followed by the French, who actually joined the English on St. Christopher in a surprise night attack on native Indians. The French proved more willing than the English to combat and push back the fierce Carib Indians on Guadeloupe and Martinique, though they took somewhat longer to turn to sugar. By 1655, England was ruled by Oliver Cromwell, who sent a large army to join pirates in seizing Jamaica from the Spaniards. A few years later, the French occupied the western third of Santo Domingo, now named Saint Dominique. Later Haiti. Cromwell's expedition had tried but failed to capture any part of Santo Domingo. From Walter Edgar's South Carolina, A History. English adventurers established colonies. Well, anyways, yeah. I have spent countless hours on this website explaining our kinship with the British West Indies. The American Revolution artificially sundered the Deep South from the British West Indies. In 1776, there were 26 British colonies in the Americas, and we had far more in common with the ones who remained loyal to the crown, We shared a common civilization with Barbados, the Leeward and Windward Islands, and Jamaica. Louisiana shared a common civilization with Saint Dominic, Guadeloupe, and Martinique. Florida shared a common civilization with Cuba. Are we Anglo-Saxons or Normans as our ancestors thought? The answer is probably a bit of both. We have been heavily influenced by both the Caribbean and the North. The South is best properly seen as a transition zone between the pure slave societies of the Caribbean and the pure settler societies of North America. We managed to be both a slave society and a settler society. As it happens, the one country in the world with which we have this in common is Cuba. I find that interesting how he compares that with Cuba. I never really understood that. Anyway, the point is that purity spiraling is based on a false image of our past and is a distraction from what we need to focus on in the present. European immigration only grazed the South in the 20th century. In the 21st century of low birth rates and dying populations, it is a mute issue, and the small differences that do exist between us will be erased by time. We have much more important things to do, like defending our monuments which are under assault, repulsing the Third World invasion, and nurturing a discourse online that will stimulate and revive Southern national consciousness. Yeah, the League of the South is not really doing that well. At its core, the South is white and Anglo-Protestant. It can and should remain that way. At the same time, we should acknowledge that we have always had Christian and non-British minorities, as well as ties to the rest of the wider world. There is no such thing as a pure culture. It is a mistake to base our identity on the idealization of a pure culture that never has or ever will exist. And indeed, he is right about that. So, hey, what's up, Andrew, bro? How's it hanging, buddy? How are things going with you, buddy? Anyways, the American South is not, contrary to thought, the American South is actually not a contiguous culture. There is a lot of regional variations within both the South and the North and the West. The United States of America is a united country, but there are many different sub-regions and subcultures. So, first of all, we never really had the Puritan mindset. That is all a Southern Israelite LARP. That's a dread-tard LARP. To think that the Puritans or the Pilgrims had any kind of minimal influence. Now, the Huguenots and the Scotch-Irish Presbyterians, they did bring a degree of a Calvinist influence into the American South, but there weren't that many Puritans or Pilgrims that came over. There was always a strong Tory. There was always a very strong Tory influence on the American Revolution in the South, and there was always a very significant number of Southerners that were actually Tories that understood and realized that South Carolina and Georgia had a very close connection to places like, the Bahamas and the Barbados, etc., etc. So when the South expanded westward, it pushed racial hierarchy. It pushed significant racial hierarchical variations, and the South always had a very strong conservative mindset and culture to it. The South was not exactly radically Protestant, but nevertheless it was at its core a very Protestant society. So anyways, yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. Give us a live demonstration of Southern Stand Your Ground laws if Mormon Shaggy shows up. I don't support libertarianism, Anderl. I am not an advocate of libertarian and individualist thinking and motives. I am at heart a collectivist, and I believe that civilization and social cohesion is more important than trying to be concerned with individual liberty and general pursuit of one's own personal material embezzlement. So I actually don't support stand your ground laws. But regardless anyways, and also Shaggy is never going to live up to his threats. Lit Southern Stream. Alright, so the American South has its origins, I think, in the Norman conquest of England. The Norman culture that spread from Normandy and went to England across the Channel and also spread to Palestine, to Syria, to Naples and Sicily, and even to a part of Spain for a while, and then also took over England, Scotland, Wales, and Ireland, etc. I believe that that is the real origin of Southern culture. Michael Cushman has also postulated a good theory. When the Crusaders went to the Holy Land to recapture the Sepulchre, they created a very strong hierarchical plantation culture that spread across the Mediterranean to Spain and Portugal. And Spain and Portugal brought this plantation culture to South and Central America. They brought this Mediterranean plantation culture that was started by the Crusaders to Central and South America. The Dutch, when they colonized a part of Brazil, they imported that Portuguese slave-holding Brazilian culture to the West Indies. And Sephardic Jews, or Sephardic Jewish pirates, transplanted that with their trade with the Dutch to the British West Indies. And from the British West Indies, this kind of slave-holding plantation culture spread into the Deep South, beginning with South Carolina. So there's a lot of cultural and civilizational transition and transmutation stuff, you could say, about that. It's also interesting how most of the Crusaders were in fact Normans, or how a large number of Crusaders were French and Normans, and that a lot of southern plantation owners in the 17th and 18th century were in fact descended from Norman cavaliers. The cavalier culture that spread to eastern Virginia and to the Piedmont, that kind of very strong elitist culture that was brought over from Western England and Cornwall and Devonshire and Wessex, was very foundational to the influence of the Tidewater. The Cavaliers were people that fought against the Roundheads in the English Civil War. They supported Charles Stuart, Charles I of the House of Stuart. They fought against the ideas of the Puritans, and they were strongly Episcopalian and Anglican. And they transported that Elizabethan high church Anglican culture to the Tidewater states. The culture that started in the Bahamas, in St. Kitts and Nevis, in the Barbados and Bermuda, that culture spread to Georgia and to South Carolina and created the Deep South. The Scotch-Irish, or the border reivers in the borderlands between England and Scotland, combined with their ancient egalitarian love to fight and war, which they could have possibly inherited from the Celts and the Picts, as well as their radical Calvinism, they migrated to Northern Ireland, or to Ulster, and from Ulster, because they were not allowed any type of ability to own their own land, they had to pay a poll tax to the Church of Ireland, and there was a lack of representation and high taxation under Queen Anne, forced a lot of these Scotch-Irish to immigrate to Appalachia. This, combined with the Cajun culture from New Brunswick and Labrador that went to Louisiana, combined with French West Indian culture and other aspects that went into Louisiana, as well as the migration of the French Huguenots into South Carolina and Georgia, is basically what created the Southern culture, or the culture of the South. There wasn't a continuous inflow or a continuous flow of Southern culture as such. Instead, it evolved out of many different colonial or colonizing influences from Great Britain, and by the time of the American Revolution, there really wasn't such a thing as a united South. The American Revolution was the first struggle in which white Southerners found unity and found some kind of common identity to draw themselves together. But even as far back as the American Revolution, and even before that, Southern politicians felt very highly underrepresented and indeed treated in an inferior position to their northern counterparts in New England, where the hotbed of the American Revolution was located. Boston and New York and Philadelphia were the center of the American Revolution, and really none of the centers of the South, except Virginia and Williamsburg, were really significant centers of the South. The South always had a very strong aristocratic planter culture and very strong aristocratic and patrician mindset that lasted down to the Civil War. Now, this didn't so much influence the frontier, where things were more egalitarian, but Toryism was quite rampant in South Carolina, and especially in Georgia. The high amount of Toryism that existed in Georgia was one of the reasons the British were able to capture Savannah so easily. But lest I digress, the American Revolution was a testing ground for Southern identity, or the rise in Southern identity, which had already formed in its own basis, in the colonial period. All of this stuff started out in the colonial period. The South is an offshoot of English culture and British imperial culture, but glazed in with American patriotic thought and distinction and stuff. But after the American Revolution, now Southerners had to contend with the notions that all men were created equal in the eyes of God, with the Declaration of Independence and free and just representation to all American citizens, but at the same time had to deal with the fact that they still owned slaves, when at the same time the northern states got rid of their slaves. So in the westward migration, or in the westward migrations, you have Virginians, Georgians, and South Carolinians moving into Tennessee, Kentucky, Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, Texas, etc. In 1803, the Louisiana Purchase is done, and this pretty much, sets in place the shape of what the South will be. Like, pretty much, it is very easy to determine virtually what the entire culture of the Deep South was going to be with the Louisiana Purchase, or tracing it back to that Louisiana Purchase. So a few battles in the War of 1812 did take place, and there was a lot of laws and punishments that were put down against so-called British enemy aliens in the War of 1812, in which they were interned or imprisoned because they had like double citizenship with the United Kingdom And this is highly farcical considering that the American South was much less liberal and far more aristocratic and closer to English culture and Scottish culture than was the case of the North. But regardless, Southerners fought with the Northerners and Westerners in fighting the British in the War of 1812. Another distinguishing feature of what drove the expansion and the rise of the South was the various Indian wars. The various types of wars with the Cherokee, the Creeks, the Shawnee, the Carib Indians, and especially the Seminole Wars in Florida. These various wars helped to build up a strong sense of racial identity and a sense of fighting a race war and fighting for a common white kind of cultural conglomerate. This was also a time of Anglo-Saxon Romanticism and Jacksonian culture. So the next thing about Southern identity was the influence of Andrew Jackson on the American South and the rise of Jacksonian egalitarianism. The Jacksonian Democrats, and I find this funny from Eric Duchamp, who says that Texas will be a blue state in the comments. I don't think that Eric realizes the pure amount of influence that Jacksonian democracy actually had. Jacksonian democracy was heavily influenced on Western frontier living and Western frontier lifestyle. And basically, it considered that all white men were free and equal in the eyes of God and in the face of the Constitution. But Andrew Jackson was also a very staunch Unionist. He was a slaveholder and he was a very strong Unionist. And he did not believe in nullification or secession. And he got into a lot of fights with John C. Colhan, who wanted South Carolina to secede from the Union. So there is a very strong influence of Jacksonian democracy that I wanted to point out. And it's not the same as European socialist tradition. Jacksonian democracy is far more libertarian, it is far more egalitarian, and it basically harkens back to the influence of the American Revolution and to Jeffersonianism and the Anti-Federalist Party. Jefferson did not see himself as an American, he saw himself as a Virginian. He saw himself as a Virginian patrician planter. He was a Republican and a classical liberal, but he did believe in slavery. He was, for a time, at least later in life, an abolitionist, but he did believe, in white supremacy. Thomas Jefferson and many of these other Southern founding fathers in the American Revolution, unlike their Northern counterparts, were very much strong advocates for white racial supremacy and for maintaining the slaveholding status quo. Now, abolitionism might very well have spread into the South if it was not for the Haitian Revolution. The revolution in Haiti is what made Southerners more reactionary and pretty much inverted them towards not being abolitionists. So after 1800, abolitionism was all but dead. Like the ideas of classical liberalism and the Enlightenment that had been so strong in driving the American Revolution was pretty much dead by the Jacksonian era. But Andrew Jackson was still a strong advocate in extending the franchise to all free white men, and he was very much a strong advocate for liberty and equality. But regardless, the South was not about to give up on slavery. So slavery started in the 1630s, but it was not until the late 1600s that the importation of blacks or black Africans was really highly considered. So the plantation culture, like I already said, started in the British West Indies and spread to Charleston, Savannah, and to the deep southern colonies, and they became overwhelmingly cash crop export and commodities import based economies in the colonial period. This continued after the American Revolution, and there was actually very limited internal development in the southern states. For a while in the Jacksonian era, there were some improvements in education and literacy and amenities, but overall by the 1850s, the idea of internally trying to improve and diversify the economy was dead. Also, earlier in the 19th century, poor white farmers owned slaves. But by the time of the Civil War, it became more elitist. A smaller number of white Southerners were owning a larger number of slaves. The plantation systems were getting bigger. The number of slaves was actually growing. And if you ever read Time on the Cross, which is about a defense of like Southern slavery and the plantation economy, you'll actually find out that slaves lived much better lives than workers in the northern factories. Now, to a degree, there's a lot of mixed ambiguisms about it. Free wage workers in the North were, in the long term, a lot better off because they could join trade unions, they could strike, they could get insurance and pay and stuff. But their lifestyle before the Civil War was not really that much better from the Southern slaves. So that's probably a lot of the reason why there is a lot of sympathy for the livelihood of Southern slaves in the North, something which was completely absent in the South. There is all sorts of Christian preachers and all sorts of people defending slavery, and an entire racial caste system like in Spanish America gradually built up and developed in the South. The reason why it never became so profane was because of the Civil War. So anyways, Southerners, of course, expanded westward. They took Texas and the Southwest from Mexico in the Texas War of Independence, the Battle of the Alamo and stuff. Sam Houston was a very strong neo-romanticist, and he lived in the age of Romanticism, and he believed in Romantic Anglo-Saxonism, and he talked about how Texas would be inherited naturally by the Anglo-Saxon and Scotch-Irish races. So the Republic of Texas became independent for a while, and that it joined as the 45th state into America. No, I'm sorry, it joined as the 25th state in 1845. After the annexation of Texas, there was a lot of hysteria in the North, and there was a lot of strong distaste. And, you have things like the Wilmot Proviso and a bunch of this other stuff going on about anti-slavery antagonism. So the South actually becomes more dependent on slavery and the notion of states' rights. And now I will talk about the Knights of the Golden Circle. So the Knights of the Golden Circle were a Freemasonic organization that was formed in 1847. they advocated for the idea of taking Mexico, Nicaragua, Belize, Costa Rica, and Panama, Cuba, and the West Indies, and actually breaking away from the northern United States and creating this triangular Caribbean empire of sorts that would be based upon a Roman equestrian ideal. It could either be a republic or a monarchy. More than likely, it would have been a republic. It was basically going to be a Latin American style republic, but it would be closer to like the organization of either the Empire of Brazil or the Second Mexican Empire in its nature. But the Knights of the Golden Circle did not really have a wide-ranging influence except in like Charleston, Savannah, New Orleans, Richmond, and elsewhere, and Memphis. Most Southerners were basically Jeffersonian and Jacksonian Democrats. But by the 1850s, if you read the writings of George Fitzhugh, you actually come to notice that there is a shift away from egalitarianism and from pro-democracy and Republican ideas, and sort of a revival of an interest in the Middle Ages and Gothic ideas, or Gothicism. The novels of Sir Scott, and all of these different tales and stuff about knights and chivalry became very popular with the Southern planters in the late antebellum period. If you read the works of George Fitzhugh, he basically says that slavery and authoritarianism and hierarchy is superior to democracy. He actually literally says that slavery is not the problem, but it's democracy. He actually literally advocates the idea of a republic. He is a Republican. George Fitzhugh is a Republican, or he does advocate for a republic. But, you know, he isn't really talking about July the 4th. He's talking about the Middle Ages, and he's talking about knights and chivalry, and he's talking about patricians and the superiority of a almost proto-fascist authoritarian culture. Many people even say that George Fitzhugh is the father of American fascism. There is also some import of German Romanticism into the South as well. A lot of Southern Romanticism and a lot of Southern antebellum feelings were greatly influenced from European and especially German Romanticism. So there is a lot of stuff that was coming in. Another thing, too, that I want to point out is that in 1848, a series of revolutions broke out across Europe, and a bunch of French and German socialists came over to the northern United States. They're called the 48ers. And these 48ers had a very strong influence in driving a lot of the vote in favor of Lincoln in 1860. I just wanted to point that out. So anyways, in 1861, this was not the first time that this happened, but the cries for secession took place. Now, the South was as much divided as the rest of the United States. I think most Southerners supported John Bell Hood. I'm not entirely for sure, but the South was overwhelmingly Democrat in 1861. So South Carolina seceded from the Union and tried to basically create a breakaway republic of sorts. And eventually all of the deep Gulf states, Texas, Louisiana, Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, etc., and Georgia, they all succeeded and broke away from the Union. And when Lincoln called for 75,000 volunteers, after the bombardment on Fort Sumter, the other southern states, other than Kentucky, broke away and joined and formed the Confederate States. Now, the Confederate States had a mixture of different ideologies, and I think the main issue is that the Confederacy was not able to form into a national state. It was not able to really grasp the idea and the influence of a 19th century nation state in the Otto-Bismarckian sense. You know, like how Germany and Italy unified. The Confederacy was actually closer to the Habsburgs and the Second Mexican Empire in the sense that it was really more of an entity than it was an actual nation. For example, the governor of Georgia at one point, midway in the Civil War, advocated seceding from the Confederacy and just having his own nation of Georgia. Or the governor of Georgia called for like Georgia succeeding from the Confederacy. So the Confederacy had a lot of unity and a lot of other imperfluous problems and impositions. Another thing too, they fought to maintain and keep slavery and the social status quo, which at this point was virtually impossible to maintain because the Civil War destroyed, pretty much entirely destroyed, the planter economy and the entire antebellum social order, even before the Civil War ended. There was a lot of problems with hyperinflation. There was a lot of problems with getting proper munitions and armaments and stuff out to the Confederate soldiers. The Confederate soldiers were always going to be outnumbered and outsupplied. You could say that Southerners might be, better soldiers than Northerners, and in many ways they were. They were better quality fighters. They came from a longer tradition of fighting Indians, and a lot of these Southern Confederate soldiers took the experience they got from the Mexican War, or the war with Mexico, or from the different wars they had fought with the Indians and stuff, and they took to fighting against the Yanks, or the Yankees. But there is a highly individualist nature in the Confederate Army. This kind of almost Celtic Jacobite influence was very strong in the Confederacy, and there is this idea that they were fighting for honor. There is this notion that Confederates were fighting for honor and for chivalry and defending their home turf, and standing their rights, standing their ground and stuff. They really did not fight for any kind of libertarian ideas. That's actually a farce. But there was a lot of influence about this idea of chivalry and honor and prestige, and stuff like this, and being cavaliers. George Fitzhugh said that the Southern Army was basically an army of arch Tories that were fighting and defending their honor, their nation, and for their kindred, and for justice and stuff. But there was never a solid Confederate ideology. So basically, in terms of actual coherency, there was none. There was always a lack of railroads. Most of the transportation was done by horse and buggy. Food, ammunition, guns, supplies, and stuff got out, because of horse and buggy. There was a lack of logistics, and by the end of it, there was a complete breakdown of the economy. So the South had some early victories early on. So the South fought very early on. They fought very early on, and they had a lot of good victories. But the Union had better supplies, better logistics, and better arsenal, they were able to take Forts Henry and Donelson in the West. And this is the thing. The North won the Mississippi, the Trans-Mississippi Theater, and the Western Theater very early. When the Confederates tried to go into New Mexico and Arizona, they were beaten by Californian regiments very early. So the South lost the Western and the Trans-Mississippi Theater. The South also did not try significantly enough to invade the northern states. There were raids, of course, into Pennsylvania, into Ohio, into Illinois, and so on, but this really proved nothing. So after 1863, the tide turned, and through a very important, stunning series of battles in Virginia, Ulysses Grant basically took Richmond, and he successfully forced Robert E. Lee to surrender, at that place. What was that place called? Well, he took Richmond. And after Richmond fell, the Confederacy pretty much collapsed. So by the end of it all, the Confederate government was basically nothing. The economy was in shambles, and the southern United States, you could basically say, was very medieval, very insular, and very destroyed. You see these photographs of busted up trains and destroyed and pulled out railroads, busted up, destroyed, looted mansions and houses and stuff. Slaves, breaking free and fighting and race war with white people. You see basically the ruins of Richmond and the burnt up, charred up ruins of Atlanta and Savannah, etc. Richmond was basically in ashes and was burning up and stuff, etc. So it was pretty bad. It was a pretty bad situation. The photographs and the pictures of the American Civil War actually look a lot like World War I. There is a lot of aspect of trench warfare and siege warfare, a lot like in World War I, especially during the Battle of Spotsylvania Courthouse. There's a lot of stuff that almost looks like World War I in a way, but on a far lesser scale. So Sherman burned down Atlanta. The South only fought for notions of honor and for fidelity and stuff. They did not try to fight for logistics and for, a permanent identity and for a nation state, and that's why the South lost. Another thing, too, the North, if you listen to the battle hymn of the Republic, you will notice that there is almost this radical, religious, fanatical notion that the North is fighting against a European-influenced, gentrified, neo-feudal medieval culture, and the North is fighting for a liberal, industrial, Enlightenment, New World-based republic against the old feudal system of the South. So at the end of the Civil War, you have political and presidential and then congressional reconstruction, radical Republican reconstruction, and you have these red Republicans who basically, they take citizenship away from all of the people that were part of the Confederacy. Like all of the former Confederates, they have all their citizenship taken away, because they're seen as traitors. They were traitors. They fought against the United States government, they fought against the American army, and they are seen as traitors, basically. So in Reconstruction, the South basically falls back into a pretty bad situation. The blight is very strong. A lot of white Southerners are starving. They go back home. All of their crops have been destroyed and burned down. Their animals are gone. All of the slaves, all of their property is gone. It's a pretty bad situation. The South is in economic shambles, and for the next 14 or 15 years of Reconstruction, basically no progress is seen. It's a very bad and very horrendously bad blight, you know, but eventually the Redeemers and the Ku Klux Klan and the White League fight back, and you have these new Southern Democrat populists that come into power. You have in each of the deep Southern states and in all of the Southern states, all of the Republican majority governments are overthrown. Their constitutions are completely redrafted and replaced with Democratic white majority constitutions. Blacks lose all of their representation, and basically you see a return to white rule. So the South basically does return back to this bourbon or bourbon white supremacy. And this is the origins of what would become the Jim Crow laws. In the antebellum South, you had the slave laws and the slave codes. In the postbellum South, you have new race codes and race laws and segregation laws between whites and blacks. And, you know, it's a lot like apartheid in South Africa, but there's some differences. And it's practiced differently in each southern state. But what's interesting is that northern states also adopt segregation. And by the time you get to the turn of the 20th century, it's all pretty much been pushed back. Like, the idea of white dominance and white supremacy and racial supremacy is pretty much won out. At least for a period of about 80 years, until you get to the civil rights. But the South really does go through a lot of problems. It becomes much more stagnant than the rest of the United States. In the 1910s and early 20s, the boll weevil virus spreads all over the deep South, and it destroys the cotton cash crop. So the boll weevil infestation destroys cotton as being the main staple of the South, and afterwards the South has to diversify. There is also problems with dysentery and germs and stuff. There is a lot of poverty there's a lot of extreme poverty in the South, and there is a lot of problems and issues, you know, in regards to the very slow and backward development of the South. In the 1880s and 1890s, there is white populist workers' parties that are formed that try to make things easier for white workers. And there's almost a socialist movement that actually develops. But by the time of World War I, this movement is largely dead. So there's actually almost a socialist movement that almost happens in Oklahoma and Arkansas, and it's because of this extreme poverty. Typhus, dysentery, boll weevil virus, and various other types of diseases become very common. There's a problem with pellagra. So pellagra was this sickness that basically was very common in the South, and this is one of the problems and issues that existed between the end of the Civil War and the New Deal of Roosevelt. So you have pellagra, And basically it caused symptoms like this. It looks like cancer, but this is pellagra. The pellagra epidemic, which was caused by extreme poverty and malnutrition, was one of the lowest points in Southern history. It reached its climax around the nadir of the Southern economy when the boll weevil was marching across the Cotton Kingdom from Mexico to the Atlantic. In the colonial and antebellum era, the Southern population was much smaller, and there was abundant game to supplement a corn and pork-based diet. But much of that had been wiped out in the early 20th century South. As we have already seen, it got so bad that even the white-tailed deer and the wild turkey were nearly hunted to extinction in the New South. No one remembers, much less romanticizes, pellagra and the end of the Cotton Kingdom when cotton plummeted to 5 cents a pound. Joseph Goldberger, a Jewish physician from New York, played a key role in establishing that pellagra was caused by poverty and malnutrition. So for a very long time, the South had a lot of problems with malnutrition and poverty, especially the Deep South. This actually happened more so when boll weevil went through the South and destroyed the cash crop economy, and most of the South was still very agrarian and basically dependent upon basically almost manual labor, sharecropping. It was a sharecropping economy. So by the late 1860s, the South transitioned into a complete sharecropping economy, and right at the beginning of the 20th century and going into the Great Depression era, pellagra was one of the problems and issues that hit the South. So there is actually a bit of a socialist movement that developed for a while. But already in the 1910s, the solid Democrat South began breaking apart. By 1928, the solid South was already breaking apart. And there was already some Republican influence that was coming into, for example, Missouri, and into a lot of places where Germans were the majority in the South. The Germans were always very strongly Republican, whereas other white Southerners were usually Democrat. So anyways, we get to the Spanish-American War, and a lot of Southerners fought in the Spanish-American War. It was mainly Southerners that fought in the Spanish-American War, or it was about maybe 1/3 of the American army was Southerner. In World War I, there was quite a lot of Southern generals and Southern soldiers that fought. George Patton, although he was born in California, his ancestors were from Virginia, and they fought in a Confederate cavalry regiment in the Civil War. And also by the Wilsonian era, the South was finally abandoning this kind of cavalier, lost cause mentality, and was returning back into sort of the Jacksonian democracy roots and stuff. And it was embracing Wilsonian democracy and the ideas of Woodrow Wilson. And so the South was quite important and hefty in its influence on the progressive movement. And World War I also helped to diversify and speed up the economy, but it was only with the New Deal. The New Deal and the Great Depression and the horrific consequences of the Great Depression and the Wall Street crash that the federal government finally started to actually take an interest in helping to economically develop the South. So at last, the cotton plantation system and stuff, and the sharecropping system finally broke down. By the early 1950s, and especially going into the 60s, the sharecropping system was finally gone. But Southern Democrats had a lot of influence in the Roosevelt New Deal era, and there was a lot of trust busting and a lot of kind of this idea of government having a hand in running the economy, and a lot of new progressive constitutions and amendments were passed in Alabama, in Texas, and Oklahoma. Another thing too, oil was discovered, and when oil was discovered, the South finally became wealthy again. Texas and Oklahoma, Arkansas, and Louisiana became important oil-producing hubs. And so oil and the development of oil and gas and gasoline pumps helped to really build up and destroy the poverty. But it was only in World War II that the South finally catched up and began to industrialize and urbanize and actually pick up to a similar economic pace with the rest of the United States. Again, George Patton, Eisenhower, MacArthur, and a lot of significant World War II generals had Southern origins. The South had a lot of air bases and gas pumping. There was a lot of gas pumps and pumping stations in the Midwestern South that helped to drive the U.S. and Allied forces in World War II. And of course, Los Alamos, New Mexico is where the atomic bomb was first exploded. So after World War II, a lot of German rocket scientists set up home in Alabama. And Alabama, for a while, became the center of the American space industry. So, with World War II and with the military bases and in the Cold War, the South finally came out of its regionalism. The South pushed out of its regionalism and started to industrialize, but then the Civil Rights Movement came. The Civil Rights Movement happened. And you have a resurgence of the Ku Klux Klan. The second Klan was already organized in 1916, and the Klan was very popular all over the United States in the 1920s and 30s. And they had a very racial, neo-romantic vision and ideas of America. The South was also very instrumental in 1923 with the Johnson-Reed Act that stopped virtually all immigration from overseas until the 1960s. And so America became much less of an immigrant society for a while. Now, during the Civil Rights era, you have these activists like Dr. Martin Luther King, who basically wanted to be able to have sex with white women and wanted to be empowered with having sexual dominance over white women and basically free will and free exercise. And also a lot of businesses and business ventures wanted to come down into the South, and their businesses were threatened by the existence of Jim Crow laws. So through the 1960s and 1970s, all of these Jim Crow and segregation laws were struck down. Most white Southerners overtly opposed the end of segregation and racial integration, and there was a lot of fight back against it, but the federal government simply passed a series of civil rights acts, and basically that was the end of Jim Crow. Martin Luther King really did not care that much about full equality with blacks and with other racial Americans. Instead, he just wanted to have empowerment and feel better than he actually was and have a higher social status. So with the breakdown and the end of Jim Crow, white Southerners became largely Republican. In the past, the South had been Democrat and favored the silver standard over the gold standard, and it tended to actually support government regulation. The civil rights completely reversed this. The majority of white Southerners became strongly Republican, not necessarily Rockefeller, but more so like Barry Goldwater sort of Republicans. And they also became advocates of small government. You know, next to almost no government interference in the economy. And also, the South became much more laissez-faire capitalist. Probably for the first time since really the progressive era, at least the South started to become a lot more socially conservative than it actually was even in the late Jim Crow period. Also, racial integration destroyed the development of black people. Black people had their own banks, they were making more money, and they were actually socially more successful under Jim Crow than they were after desegregation. Black people, the family unit of black people broke up. A lot more number of black people went to prison, and after the 1960s, the imprisonment rate, the internment rate of prison inmates among blacks skyrocketed enormously. So it was basically desegregation at military gunpoint, and it was sort of a second Reconstruction. So by the 1990s, the South was strongly Republican. The Democrat influence largely went away, and it became much more Republican. And also, a lot of different corporations and banks and businesses started to invest in the South. A lot of Northerners were fleeing from the Rust Belt and from the deindustrialization and the poverty of the North and the ghettoization of the North, and they fled to the South and started settling in Florida, in southern Florida, in Georgia and South Carolina. There's a lot of retirees and military personnel that have settled. Walmart, Target, H&R Block, a lot of business and banking corporations and global conglomerates have moved into the southern states. And basically, I guess what you could say about the last real main phase about the South is the construction of highways and freeways and superways, the replacement of an agrarian economy with an industrial and private sector and high-tech dominated economy, more and more of a racial and egalitarian integration, the gradual death of the Southern accent, the unique country boy Southern accent, being replaced with a more standardized American variant in parlance or American speech, a further Americanization and metropolitanization of the South, a lot more people living in the cities and the suburbs, a lot more Jews and a lot more Jewish influence in Southern culture as well, and much more of an embracement in globalization and, basically in different immigrant groups from all over the world coming and settling in cities like Dallas, Houston, Miami, Richmond, Savannah, and basically with these diverse neighborhoods and stuff, you see a backlash against the Confederate heritage, and you're seeing the dismemberment and the collapse of Confederate monuments and the Black Lives Matter movement that emerged in the 2010s with the death of Trayvon Martin or whatever. and sort of yet another civil rights movement emerging with BLM, Antifa, anti-fascist, very strong far-left, anti-colonialist, anti-imperialist, anti-first world movements or whatever. They want to fight against, quote-unquote, the exploitation of a colonized society, and basically the notion that blacks need to decolonize themselves, they need to decolonize their minds, and, you know, all of this stuff about transsexualism, transhumanism, and really all of this stuff, you know. On a more bright note, Elon Musk is moving Tesla and SpaceX to Texas, you know, but it's making rent a lot more expensive in Austin. There's also more of an embracement in basic universal income, but, you know, there's a lot more tolerance to homosexuality, transsexual identity, transsexualism, transgenderism, transracial identity, transhumanism, AI, singularity, and integration. And, you know, it's basically, you know, stepping into this kind of globalizing or globalization mindset that you basically see the end of this Southern culture that had its origins in Jamestown and Roanoke Island and in, you know, St. Augustine, Florida and stuff. So, are there any final thoughts from anyone in regards to this discussion? Because right now, I think the main thing that drives the Southern economy is the military-industrial complex, gas and oil reserves and all of that, etc. So, yeah. Alright, so I am in the smithy. I'm in the smithy if anybody wants to talk, or if anybody wants to have a discussion, you know, or talk about what's been discussed here. Eric Duchamp, smooth shave, much better. Blah, blah, blah. Wins the next punt the gun weigh-in. You are to know that Drunken Surfer does that shit on Tuesdays. You having a beard looks like you're homeless. You don't need to starve yourself. Just eat balanced meals. I turned into a French frog. Wa la la la. Oh, shampoing, mes mazières. Oh, très bon. Are you still taking those appetite suppressants? Yes, I am. Ribbit. Drinks 2 sodas. Tries to lose weight. Weird diet. Texas, a blue state in 2024. Based, lit Southern Stream. Give us a live demonstration of Southern Stand Your Ground laws if Mormon Shaggy shows up. I second that. Golden Circle supporter. That's right! Based Golden Circle advocates up in this motherfucker. So your culture is other people's culture. Gotcha. Poor Native Americans! Oh, the poor red men. The poor red savages. Jacksonian democracy spread the vote too much. Should have stayed a right only for landowners. You know, I actually have to agree with that, Anderl. True, cool, interesting. The South fought to have more catboy pussy. Or catboy boozy. Yeah, Eric, you do realize that Rudy is from Canada. Catboy Cammy is from Australia. I think Perth, Australia. He actually lives pretty close to where Euros lives in Australia. And Nick Fuentes is in Chicago. So, no idea what you're going on about, you weird, with your weird homosexual fetishes here. Not reparations, true. Well, there is discussions and talks about there being reparations to black people for slavery in universities and colleges. But anyways, I'm having a lot of allergy problems. So, does anybody want to share, or does anyone have any thoughts about Southern culture, Southern identity, Southern regional identity? Because if not, then I'm going to go ahead and move on. So here's some books. If you're interested, here's some books that you can read. I'll turn my camera off right here. So, The Southern Colonies in the 17th Century by Wesley Frank Craven. The South in the Revolution, 1763 to 1789, John Richard Alden. The South in the New Nation, 1789 to 1819, by Thomas Perkins Abernethy. The Development of Southern Sectionalism, Charles S. Sedner. The Growth of Southern Nationalism, Avery Odell Craven. The Confederate States of America, 1861 to 1865, by E. Merton Coulter. The South During Reconstruction, 1865 to 1877, also by E. Merton Coulter. Origins of the New South, 1877 to 1913, Z. Van Woodward. The Emergence of the New South, 1913 to 1945, George Brown Tyndall. The New South, 1945 to 1980, by Newman V. Bartley. So I'll post this in the chat if anybody's interested in getting these books. And I'll go back and continue my discussion here. So probably about a quarter of all major U.S. presidents are from the South. In fact, they all descend from Ulster Scots. So the South is basically a lot like Southern China. Let's see here. But yeah, Southern identity has remained very strong for a very long time, actually. It's derived mostly from Anglo-Americans and Anglo-American culture. The South is usually known as the Bible Belt because there's a very strong prevalence of evangelical Protestantism. So that's important to talk about. There's the distinct Southern dialect. Let me see here. So yeah, there's a lot of different types of economics and different types of stuff here to talk about. You know, back in 1980, the largest ancestry group in Texas was English. 3,083,223 Texans who identify as being of English ancestry, forming roughly 27% of the population at the time. That's interesting. Yeah, each of the different southern states have their own unique kind of patterns and stuff. Iced tea, sweet tea, cola, Coca-Cola, Pepsi, Mountain Dew, Sherwin, Big Red, Dr. Pepper, RC Cola. They all have their origins in the South. There is also a strong support for prohibition in the South even before the 18th Amendment. That's interesting. So some Southern authors and Southern writers. There's Eric Skin Caldwell, Edgar Allan Poe, Joel Chandler Harris, Sidney Lanier, Clint Brooks, Pat Conry, Harper Lee, Zora Neale Hurston, Eudora Wheatley, Ralph Ellison, Thomas Wolfe, William Stryon, Flannery O'Connor, Carson McCullers, James Dickey, Willie Morris, Tom Wolfe, Truman Capote, Walker Percy, Charles Portis, Barry Hanna, Alice Walker, Cormac McCarthy, Anne Rice, Shelby Foote, John Grisham, Charlene Harris, James Agee, Hunter S. Thompson, Wendell Berry, Bobby Ann Mason, Harry Cruz, Elvis Presley is from the South. Elvis Presley was born in the state of Mississippi. Rock and roll, jazz, the blues have their origins in the South. NASCAR has its origins in the South. Daytona 500, college football, a lot of this stuff has a very Southern origin to it. Television shows and stuff that's based on Southern culture is The Real McCoys, The Andy Griffith Show, The Beverly Hillbillies, Petticoat Junction, Flipper, Green Acres, Hee Haw, Carter Country, Dallas, The Dukes of Hazzard, Mama's Family, The Golden Girls, Matlock, Designing Women in the Heat of the Night, Evening Shade, Walker, Texas Ranger, Beavis and Butthead, Reba, King of the Hill, One Tree Hill, American Dad, Friday Night Lights, The Riches, The Blood, The Cleveland Show, Eastbound and Down, Justified, The Walking Dead, Heart of Dixie, Dallas, Nashville, True Detective, Bless the Hearts, Outer Banks, etc. So there's a lot of positive cultural images about the South in spite of its slaveholding and racist past, and in spite of it being so allegedly backward, impoverished, or agrarian, and highly racist and overtly traditional. There is a lot of popular culture, or a lot of American pop culture, that is of Southern derivation. Dallas, Walker, Texas Ranger, the Beverly Hillbillies. There's a lot of stuff from the South. Unfortunately, there's just too much for me, to really go over in such a short time to really, talk about it. But, yeah. So let's take a look here at this. So yeah, in World War II, the Southern economy shifted away from cotton and tobacco to cattle, rice, soybeans, corn, and other foods. So yeah, basically, there's the University of Texas MD, Anderson Cartner Center. I think the largest medical research complex is in Houston, Texas. So yeah, let's take a look here. In the late 20th century, the South changed dramatically. It saw a boom in its service economy, the manufacturing base, the high technology industries, and the financial sector. Texas in particular witnessed dramatic growth and population change with the dominance of the energy industry and the tourism industries and beef, such as the Alamo Mission in San Antonio. Tourism in Florida and along the Gulf Coast also grew steadily. There's new automobile production plants that have opened. Mercedes-Benz in Tuscaloosa, Alabama. Hyundai in Montgomery, Alabama. BMW production in Spartanburg, South Carolina. There is Toyota plants in Georgetown, Kentucky, Blue Springs, Mississippi, and San Antonio. GM manufacturing plant in Spring Hill, Tennessee. Honda factory in Lincoln, Alabama. Nissan North American headquarters is in Franklin, Tennessee. Factories in Smyrna, Tennessee, and Canton, Mississippi. Kia factory in West Point, Georgia. Volkswagen Chattanooga assembly plant. Research Triangle Park in North Carolina, and the Cummings Research Park is in Huntsville, Alabama. The Research Triangle Park is the largest research park. It engages in high-tech research and development. There's the Bank of America in Charlotte, Virginia. The Texas Medical Center in Houston has achieved international recognition in education, research, and patient care in the fields of heart disease, cancer, and rehabilitation. Texas Medical Center was the largest medical center in the world in 1994, including 14 hospitals, 2 medical centers, etc. AmSouth Ban Corporation and BBB VA Compass. SunTrust Banks is located in Atlanta, the Federal Reserve Bank of Atlanta. BB&T is headquartered in Winston-Salem. Atlanta has the Coca-Cola Company, Delta Airlines, and the Home Depot. Turner Broadcasting System, which runs the channels of CNN, TBS, TNT, Turner South, Cartoon Network, and the Weather Channel. In recent years, some southern states, most notably Texas, have lured companies with lower tax burdens and lower cost of living for their workforce. In 2019, the Fortune 500 companies headquartered in southern states included Texas with 50, Virginia with 21, Florida with 18, Georgia with 17, South Carolina with 11, and Tennessee with 10. This economic expansion has enabled parts of the South to report some of the lowest unemployment rates in the entire United States. So there are no ghettos in the southern United States for the most part. You know, Miami and some other places will be an exception to this. However, many southern states and areas still have high poverty rates when compared to the United States nationally. In the U.S., the top 10 poorest big cities of 2010, the South was represented in the rankings by 2 cities, Miami, Florida, and Memphis, Tennessee. In 2011, 9 out of 10 of the poorest states were in the South region. Now, this was 10 years ago, to be fair. All right, so I want to talk a little bit about demographic displacement. So, if trends continue where they are going, Hispanics are going to outnumber whites in the lower South and in the Southwest, at least by 2040 or 2030. You know, there is a huge black population in the Black Belt, in the Deep South and the Upper South. So if these trends continue, there is not going to be a distinctly Southern culture. And it's not just racial demographics that are driving these trends too. People from other parts of the United States are moving into Dixie, into the South, and they're also disrupting, altering, and shifting the culture of the South to look more like a mainstream American one. So there is a lot of wider Americanization and globalization that is also shifting and changing trends in the southern United States. So anyways, I think that's going to be it, basically. Is there any more questions or any more stuff in the chat to address? It doesn't look like it. Does anybody want to call in and share their personal thoughts about this stream? Does anybody want to call in and share their personal thoughts about the stream or whatever? So, anyways, in epilogue, I think this was a pretty decent stream. It didn't get as many views as the stream I did on Texas and California. Hopefully, future streams like this will be as interesting. I try to bring as much information and as much knowledge as I can in general, when I do these presentations. But, alright. I think that's pretty much it. Alright, so does anybody in Discord want to have a call-in before I go? Because I think that this discussion is pretty much done. It's pretty much done at this point. Alright. I'll go ahead and find a good outro song. Try to find a good outro song to end this on. Let's take a look here. We'll go ahead and end it to Arms in Dixie. Alright, so this is going to be it. Thank you for watching. Hope that you enjoyed this presentation. I'm going to be done with regions at this point. I just wanted to go ahead and kind of start on my own home turf. I'm going to move on now to countries at this point. I'm done with states. So yeah. Well, thank you all for tuning in and for enjoying this. It was a pleasure. Y'all have a good day.
I'll place my knapsack on my back, my rifle on my shoulder. I'll march away to the firing line, kill that Yankee soldier. I'll kill that Yankee soldier. I'll march away to the firing line and kill that Yankee soldier.
I'll be